Amid the dust and heat of Judea, where crowds jostled to hear his words, Jesus taught. His voice, serene yet penetrating, wove truths that challenged conventions and laid bare the intentions of hearts. That day, a doctor of the law, a man whose life was dedicated to the meticulous exegesis of sacred texts, approached. His bearing was erect, his expression a mask of erudition and defiance. He was not seeking wisdom, but a theological armada, a way to test the limits of that Galilean rabbi who captivated the people. "Teacher," he said, his voice projected to be heard by all, "what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" A question, though fundamental, was a formality, a preamble to an intellectual contest that he hoped would be provocative. Jesus, sensing the nation's transgression, did not offer a new doctrine, but rather returned the burden of the mission to the inquirer himself. "What is written in the law? How do you?" The man, versed in the scriptures, did not hesitate. He recited the core of the Jewish faith, the great commandment that echoed in the Shema Yisroel. "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." It was the perfect, irrefutable answer. "You have answered right," Jesus agreed with a slight nod. "Do this, and you will live." The simplicity of the answer disarmed the doctor of the law. A conversation which he had pretended to be complex had ended abruptly. Feeling his intellectual status threatened before the crowd, he sought one last time to regain control, to justify the relevance of his own erudition. He posed a second question, a mission that revealed the fronts and prejudices of his time. "And who is my neighbor?" A question hung in the thick, hot air. It was a question of boundaries, of who deserved benevolence and who could be legitimately ignored. In response, Jesus didn't offer a legalistic definition. Instead, he painted a picture with words, a parable that would become timeless. "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho," Jesus began, and the crowd fell silent. Everyone knew that road. It was a steep, winding descent of nearly 20 miles, an infamous path known as the Road of Blood. Its treacherous curves and rocky ravines were the perfect hiding place for thieves and robbers. A place of vulnerability for a lone traveler was an invitation to violence. The man in Jesus' story was an ordinary traveler, perhaps a merchant returning home, his mind occupied with business and family. The tranquility of his journey was romantic with a sudden brutality. From the shadows of the rocks, the robbers emerged. The violence was swift and merciless. They stripped him of his possessions, his clothes, his dignity. Each blow was a dull echo against the silent landscape. They left him there, in the dust of the road, half dead, a wounded body whose breath was a tenuous thread between life and death. The relentless sun began to punish his exposed skin, and the smell of iron and dust filled the air. By a coincidence of fate, or perhaps by design in Jesus' narrative, a priest was coming down that same path. A man of God whose office was to serve in the temple, an intermediary between the sacred and the profane. He spotted the fallen human form in the distance. As he approached, his step faltered. He saw the bloody body, an immobility, a possibility of death. A whirlwind of calculated thoughts may have crossed his mind. Contact with a corpse would render him ritually impure for 7 days, preventing him from performing his sacred duties. It would be an inconvenience, a complication. Perhaps the fact that the thieves were still nearby influenced his decision. Whatever the reason, a lesson was learned. With his gaze deliberately averted, he crossed to the other side of the road and quickened his pace, ignoring the suffering that marred the landscape. Shortly afterward, a Levite, another man linked to the temple service, an assistant to the priests, walked the same route. He, too, saw the man. Unlike the priest, he approached, perhaps moved by a spark of curiosity or a remnant of duty. He looked at the wounded body, assessed the gravity of the situation. He saw the necessity, a silent agony. But companionship, if it exists, was quickly suffocated by prudence or apathy. Like the priest, he too made a decision. He turned away, crossed to the opposite side, and continued his journey, his conscience perhaps a little heavier, but his path unimpeded. The silence of the desert was broken only by the almost inaudible groan of the abandoned man. A hope seemed to have faded with the rising sun. But then a third traveler appeared on the horizon. It was a Samaritan. For Jesus' audience, that word was charged with animosity. Samaritans and Jews shared a history of rivalry and mutual contempt. They were considered heretics, impure, a people to be avoided. The presence of a Samaritan on that road was, in itself, a provocation to the status quo. He was traveling astride his animal, minding his own business, when his eyes fell upon the same tragic scene that the other two had ignored. Seeing the Jewish man, his natural enemy, wounded and stripped, something in him changed his movement. It wasn't a calculation of risk or a debate over the purity ritual. It was a visceral reaction, a surge of depth and genuine composure that overwhelmed him. He didn't hesitate. He dismounted immediately and knelt in the dust beside the man. His heart went out to the fading life. With surprising delicacy, he examined the wounds. From his own saddlebags, he took what he had: olive oil to soothe the pain and wine to limit and disinfect the injuries, a traveler's practical medicine. He poured the improvised balm over the open wounds and, tearing strips of his own bandage, carefully bandaged them. The act of mercy did not end there. With effort, the Samaritan lifted the man's limp body and placed him on his own mount. He, the Samaritan, forsook his comfort and continued on foot, guiding the animal with slow, careful steps along the treacherous road until they reached an inn, a safe haven in the desolation of that path. That night, he did not continue his journey. He remained by the injured man's side, ensuring he was warm, hydrated, and safe, acting as both worker and owner. At dawn, when the man was already recovering, the Samaritan prepared to leave. But his care was not yet complete. He sought out the innkeeper, took from his bag 2 silver coins, the equivalent of 2 days' wages, and handed them over, saying, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I return." He not only helped in the moment, but also ensured continued care, assuming responsibility. Having concluded his narrative, Jesus turned his gaze to the lawyer, whose expression was now one of introspection. The parable had silenced the debate. "Which of these 3, do you think, was a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers?" Jesus asked. The scholar, trapped in his preconceived notions of theory, could not pronounce the word Samaritan. His answer was clinical, detached, but undeniably correct. The one who showed mercy on him. The connection was complete. Jesus did not offer the command that would echo through the centuries, a direct challenge not only to that man, but to all humanity. Go and do as he pleases, as the parable of the Good Samaritan transcends a simple morality of helping those in need. It radically redefines the concept of neighbor, removing all barriers of race, religion, and social status. Jesus teaches that closeness is not defined by geography or affiliation, but by compassionate action. The priest and the Levite, though geographically close, grew apart through indifference. The Samaritan, a stranger and a social enemy, became a true neighbor by drawing near through mercy. The story is a scathing critique of religion that has become an end in itself, divorced from the practice of love. It challenges us to question our own justifications for inertia and to recognize that true faith is manifested not in knowledge of the law, but in the willingness to dirty our hands to experience the same for another human being, whoever they may be.